Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan features two radio professionals with over 100 years of broadcasting experience between them. Dave Hogan and Randy Houston are both native Western North Carolinians whose rich voices have been heard in every glade, cove, and holler of Western North Carolina and East Tennessee, primarily on AM radio. And between the two of them, they've worked in just about every radio format. As you can imagine, these guys have tons of stories about the day-to-day of live radio and the interactions they've had with listeners and entertainers while they were immersed in, at the time, one of the most influential and informative mediums available. Those experiences will be featured in this podcast series. Check the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts with Randy and Dave on Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan.
Welcome back to Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan. It's good to be back with you, Randy Houston and
Dave Hogan here.
By your side on the radio. Good to be talking with you guys about our careers in radio. Dave and I, together, it's been a long time since we first cracked a mic, man.
It has been, and, one thing that just crossed my mind that I'd like to mention, and I think you'll certainly want to chime in on this, how important advertising is to a radio station.
Definitely.
And the fact that what little success, I'm not saying I had great success in radio, but it provided me with a reasonably good middle-class living for many years. And I attributed a lot of that success to the fact that I understood the advertising part of the radio industry and how important advertising is. And the only way that a radio station has to make money is through advertising.
You do.
And I caught on to that early that,
you do. Yeah.
And a lot of DJs, no, darn commercials. I've got to do commercials. They're putting too many commercials on my program. And I felt the opposite. The more the merrier. Of course, you could overload with commercials. And there have been times in my career when I felt like I had too many commercials during a particular segment. But I also realized how important those commercials were, and I tried to give the advertiser his or her money's worth. And I know you spend a lot of time in sales and management, and you know the importance of advertising.
I got to hand it to you. Hats off. I can verify what he's saying is true because when we first started working together in '93, my role was primarily the sales side of things. I was so glad to have you there to handle the programming side. And I had come from programming and sales, but when my existence was sales. And when I would bring a client to you, somebody that I had talked into coming on the air with us, and I want you to meet Dave Hogan. He's the guy that's going to be selling your widgets. And you would so impress them, you would seal the deal, you would take it back to the control room, and you would sell those widgets. You would get to know those widgets. You would go to the factory where they're made. You would understand and totally get involved in marketing and advertising and sales. And that is the lifeblood
of the radio business and TV and newspaper.
Yes.
I may have told you this story about how WSKY in Asheville, owned by Zeb Lee, and I went to work for Zeb, still a teenager, 1960, and we were playing Chicken Rock. Do you know what Chicken Rock was?
Gosh, I'm trying to think of some of the artists. Who would define that? What artist?
Well, going back. Now, Chicken Rock, for those who may not understand what I'm talking about, were radio stations that played what probably would be identified as middle of the road. You tried to play music that was not offensive on WSKY in 60, 61, when I first went to work there. we kiddingly called it chicken rock because there was some rock and roll that was just too hard.
Okay.
Too upbeat. You wouldn't play Chuck Berry and Maybelline, for instance.
Really?
But you would play, I think we mentioned the new Christy Minstrels on one of our previous podcasts.
Right.
Their music and the less, rock and roll had a lot of opposition in the early years. In the early years.
Oh yeah.
I mean, in 1957, I went on the radio in Franklin, North Carolina, WFSC, playing rock and roll music, and my father was a Baptist preacher.
Okay.
And that was a big conflict in my family. My boys on the radio playing that god-awful rock and roll music.
You were the topic of the Thanksgiving table.
Ooh, man. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving.
I love it.
Because there was so much opposition to Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis and the early rock and roll. And I ran across something. I don't know. I never played too much music on the radio by the Beatles, but a little bit. In the 90s, when you and I worked together at WISE,
right.
I was not a big fan of the Beatles when they first came out because I wasn't playing their music on the radio. But later on, I took to some of the Beatles music like Imagine.
Imagine, that's the one I was about to say.
Yesterday, some of those songs.
Yeah.
I ran across this from February 11th, 1964. There was a columnist for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper, a longtime columnist named Paul Jones. He was a very popular columnist for many years, and this came out February 11th, 1964, in Paul Jones' column in the Atlanta newspaper. This was after Ed Sullivan had the Beatles on his TV show.
The Beatles.
He also, of course, earlier had Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
And you can still pull up this stuff on YouTube, Ed Sullivan and Elvis, or Ed Sullivan and the Beatles. And you can watch what we're talking about on YouTube. But this was written by Paul Jones, 1964, February 11th. If Ed Sullivan can find no better use for the time allotted him on Sunday night than to devote it to such exhibitions as he presented last Sunday night, I suggest that CBS TV finds something else to put on this hour of prime time in place of Ed Sullivan. Why Sullivan found it necessary to aid in the phony promotion of 4 rock and roll exponents of music that is represented by somebody that looks like Moe and the Three Stooges. This is beyond my comprehension. And why he felt it necessary to load the theater with screaming teenage girls when he normally restricts his audience to grown-ups. That's also a mystery. It was obvious to those who saw the Beatles, 4 young fellows from Great Britain, that they have not attained their present notoriety on the basis of their musical talents, for the sounds emanating from their mouths were anything but music. Shorn of their mop-like hairdos, they would look and sound like many other inferior rock and roll groups which are still attempting to keep alive the fad which died when Elvis Presley entered the armed forces. There is nothing attractive about the looks or the sounds of the Beatles. There is no reason why Sullivan should take part in the absurd campaign to make the group appear to be important.
Whoa.
Now that's how the Beatles were written up in 1964.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Mr. Jones, I'm sure he lived a number of years to see the Beatles' success, but I don't know how many times he went back and ate that column.
Well, you back to talking about WSKY in the early 60, 61 along in there, playing
Chicken Rock.
Chicken Rock wouldn't play the Beatles, probably, right?
Probably would not have played the Beatles.
Yeah.
But by the time the Beatles came along, I was playing country music, and we were talking about advertising. And did I ever tell you the story about how I came to be a country music DJ on WSKY, country and gospel?
No, I'd love to hear it. I didn't know there was a story there.
Well, country music had almost died. And Zeb, bless his heart, I loved him. He was like a father figure to me. Zeb Lee was against playing country music on the radio or gospel music on the radio because he felt, as so many people did, that country music was dead because of the influence of rock and roll. But I wanted to play gospel music on Sunday morning. Somehow I wound up with this Sunday morning shift. But Zeb wouldn't let me play gospel music. I finally talked him into letting me play 1 hour of gospel music, like 6 till 7 on Sunday morning.
Early on Sunday morning.
Early on Sunday morning. He
said,
His
thinking is nobody's up at that hour anyway.
Yeah, it won't hurt.
Yeah.
I'll get him out of my hair. Hogan is pestering me about playing gospel music. Okay, play an hour of gospel music. Well, along came an aluminum siding salesman. They were called PIs. You remember? Per inquiry.
Per inquiry. You don't get paid until someone calls that 800 number.
We had some advertising from this company that was selling aluminum siding and bought some commercials on WSKY. And the station got maybe $1 for every inquiry that came in, every lead that we could provide for this company. And I had to take the calls at the radio station and take the name and phone number of the person who called in. So I had some of these spots on that 1 hour between 6 and 7 on Sunday morning. Ladies and gentlemen, so-and-so company, aluminum siding, never have to paint your house again, blah, 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 blah. Of course, aluminum siding was just beginning to get popular at that time.
It was aluminum then. It wasn't vinyl.
That's right, aluminum siding. Well, don't you know, when Zeb came in Monday morning, I had like 100 leads that I had gotten off that 1 hour of gospel music on Sunday morning.
My word.
And Zeb was just overwhelmed with, man, this is tremendous. I said, well, if you'd let me play a little more gospel music on Sunday morning, I could even get more leads. Well, that's how it wound up, that I wound up with 4 hours of gospel music on Sunday morning. Of course, after 2 or 3 weeks, the leads dried up. Everybody interested in aluminum siding had already called in, but I had the program on.
You got it.
And Zeb was getting positive comments from people. Zeb was doing sales, too, at the time as the owner, general manager of the radio station, and he got some good comments about the Sunday morning hymn time, and that's how it all started. And then I developed a little credibility with Zeb, and I said, Zeb, we ought to play some country music during the day. And one thing led to another, and I was able to get an hour or two of country music on WSKY. Nobody else in the market was playing country music. And that's so that's how WSKY came to be well known in the 1960s for country music. That's how it all started, through advertising, because radio stations are responsive to advertising. Newspapers are responsive to advertising. And I still, if I visit if I go to a place of business and I've heard their ad on radio or I've seen it in the newspaper, I always tell the proprietor of the business that I saw or I heard their ad. That way they know they're getting some response to their advertising, some results.
You taught me that. You taught me the importance of that. And I was the manager, and I was learning from Dave. I'd come from a separated background. And when I say that, a lot of disc jockeys and our former radio partners will understand it was you were either in the programming department or in the sales department. You were a friend of one and not of the other. And so I had been in programming, And then I moved over into sales. And I was in my own mind working all of that out, saying, I don't have that feeling I used to have when I was in programming of these commercials, Now I understand the importance of them and how it is keeping my paycheck coming.
Mm-hmm.
That's exact. And so you taught me that when we were together in Wise. You were all about that, and it taught me so much. And we were talking about before we went on the air. Hey, what do we want to talk about during this segment? You mentioned it earlier, Dave, about one of the reasons that you were so interested in going back to Johnson City, Kingsport, and Bristol area was that you had the opportunity to work on a classic country station.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an allure for you. And it has always been one for me. And I think it's because we both, when we both started in this business, we got a taste of a lot of different stuff. But that classic country, the early days of country radio, it really, you transitioned to WSKY and you took it to the next level and started promoting country concerts at the Old City Auditorium. I remember the Country Shindig series.
Mm-hmm.
I would listen to the commercials that said, this Saturday night, it's Country Shindig number 12 at the City Auditorium with Farron Young and Marty Robbins and Kitty Wells. And you were in on promoting those early days of people actually getting to see these artists.
I was very fortunate, as I mentioned. We started playing country music in the early 60s on WSKY. And Mac Wiseman, you know the name.
Yes.
And Mac was a great musician, great singer, known particularly but not exclusively as a bluegrass artist. But Mac was also a well-educated person, and he was one of the founding fathers of the Country Music Association, which came into existence in the early 1960s to promote country music, which, as we've referred previously to as being considered dead in the early 60s. So the Country Music Association came along to promote country music. And word gets around that WSKY plays country music. So I got a call from Mac Wiseman one day. And Mac said, I understand you're playing country music there in Asheville. Do you mind if we have some of the country music artists stop and let you interview them on your show when they come through Asheville? I said, of course not. I'd love it.
Yeah.
And so, and Mac went on to say, now, if you come to Nashville, Dave, I'll introduce you to a lot of these country music artists. And we're going to start up a disc jockey convention, and each year we're going to have DJs in October come to Nashville and meet the country artists. And so I was fortunate enough to have these artists stop and visit me. And that way I got into the promotion business and promoted the shindigs you referred to at the Asheville City Auditorium, and also went to Nashville, met a lot of the artists, visited in the homes of quite a few of the artists. William Lee Golden of the Oak Ridge Boys, have been to his home, and Tammy Wynette to her home, and Tom T. Hall out at Fox Hollow, he called his home. And so I got in with the country music crowd, and some of the finest people that I've ever met are people in the country music business. Also, the record promoters, country music was promoted in a different way then as it is now. In a lot of cases, the artists themselves would go out on the road promoting their
latest record.
Also, the record companies had promoters who would stop at the radio station, visit the DJ. Mel Foree, F-O-R-E-E, F-O-R-E-E, Mel Foree, was a promoter of And I think Mel has the distinction of being the first paid record plugger. They called them pluggers for RCA Victor. Mel would stop about once a month in Asheville, and he would bring me the latest recordings on the RCA Victor. I remember one time Mel came by, and he said, I want you to listen to this. This has not been released yet. I want you to listen to this singer and tell me what you think. And I always had a tape rolling because I would sometimes ask Mel about an artist and the song, who wrote the song, that sort of thing. So I had tape rolling. And he put on this disc. It was an acetate, I think they called it, disc. And this voice came on, "Oh, the snakes crawl at night." Remember that song?
That's what they say. Oh, the snakes crawl at night. That's Charlie Pride.
Well, now listen to that. And at simultaneously recording it. And after it was over, Mel said, "What do you think of that?" And I said, "That's good. That's a good country song. Who is the singer?" Says a fellow named Charlie Pride, and he said, "I need to ask your advice on something." And I said, "What's that, Mel?" He said, "He's black." I said, "You're kidding me." "No, he's black." And what I want to ask you is, do you think we ought to mention that he's a black artist? Or just keep it quiet and let the public decide for themselves what they think of his music? So we talked about that, and I can't remember exactly where the conversation led, but I think I came down on the side of just, put it out there and don't mention and don't make an issue of the fact that he's black, and just let the song stand on its own. So the punchline to this story is, as soon as Mel Forey left the radio station, I went on the air and played Charlie Pride and the Snakes Crawl at Night. Shortly thereafter, I got a call from Mel, who was listening
as he was leaving town. And he was over about Hot Springs or somewhere. And he called me and he said, "Dave," he said, "that's not been released yet. Please don't play it anymore." To my knowledge, I'm the first disc jockey in the United States or anywhere to play a Charlie Pride record on the radio. That's a great story. Great story. But and your advice was obviously heeded, because I read an article recently. Chet Atkins was the one who was head of RCA Records at that time, and he discovered Charlie Pride, and he wrestled with the same question. That question was coming from RCA Records. Should we identify?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned he discovered Charlie as a recording artist. He did, but Red Sovine. Red Sovine was a very active country music artist in those days, and he had met Charlie up in Montana, somewhere where Charlie was living at the time.
Yes.
And became acquainted with him and brought him to Chet Atkins and said, "You ought to listen to this singer here." And so, but anyway, Charlie caught on. There was no big issue about Charlie being black, and I promoted Charlie on a couple of shows at the City Auditorium in Asheville.
Did you? I have memories of this, and they're foggy. And I've heard other people talk about the fact that Charlie Pride and Ronnie Milsap were booked on the same show in Asheville, and Ronnie Milsap, local guy. I mean, that's all you can say. Born in Robbinsville, but he played around Asheville all his life, and so he was the local guy, but Charlie Pride was the big and the crowd really, that Charlie Pride was the bill of the show, but Ronnie brought the house down, I understand.
I booked Ronnie on the first show that he was on that would be considered a country music show. He was singing blues. He was singing, a friend of mine who also was raised over in the town I was raised in Andrews. he was an insurance agent and had an office in Asheville, New York Life Insurance. And he called me one day and he said, Dave, what are you doing at such and such a time? 3 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever. He said, I want you to come down here and I want you to listen to this singer. His name is Ronnie Millsaps. Ronnie was still using the S on the end of the name. Millsaps, and he's from Robbinsville. And he said, I was walking up Biltmore Avenue and I heard this singer singing blues music. It's now called the Orange Peel. I forget what it was called at the time.
Maybe it's the Orange Peel.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't the Orange Peel till later. That building where the Orange Peel is located went through several names. Country Palace. It was the Country Palace at one time. But even before the Country Palace, I forget what it was called. I can look it up. But I went down. That's where I met Ronnie Millsap. And he found out I was a country music DJ, and he started doing some country songs. And so I just started promoting country music at the time. And I paid Ronnie $150. That covered Ronnie and his band.
My goodness.
$150.
Wow.
To come on the show, open up the show. And I honestly don't remember if Charlie Pride was on that show or not. I just don't remember. But I remember this. He was doing Roger Miller's King of the Road. Well, he did a couple of Roger Miller tunes, and he broke a guitar string.
Ronnie was playing guitar?
Ronnie was playing guitar, broke a guitar string, and was so embarrassed when I paid him his money, he didn't want to take it because he felt like he'd let the audience down. That's before anybody knew who Ronnie Millsap was.
Wow.
And later on, of course, Ronnie became a superstar and a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame. From Robbinsville, Graham County. Yellow Creek, actually, not Robbinsville. Yellow Creek. And, of course, I lived part of my childhood in Fontana Village, not far from Yellow Creek. So we knew a lot of the same area, a lot of the same people over in Graham County.
Absolutely a wonderful guy. He would be honored to be on our show. We should call him up and get him on here sometime. He's of course retired now, but recently lost his wife Joyce, who was just a guiding light in his career. The song "Only One Love in My Life," which was one of 40 some number one hit songs for Ronnie Millsap, that was a song about his wife Joyce.
But that early exposure that I had to those artists like Charlie Pride, Marty Robbins, Ronnie Millsap, many others. Later on, as time went on, from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, those songs became classics. Those artists became classic country artists.
Absolutely.
Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, and all those people. And I think I mentioned on one of our podcasts, you never get over the music that you grow up with. And I was still growing up in the 1960s, and so that music's always been special to me and still is.
Me too, Dave. Me too. And there again, it lured me back into the radio business in 2011. I got out for just a brief period of maybe a year or so, and kind of thought I was going to retire, but no, that didn't happen. I'm back in classic country radio and loving going to work every single day. I don't call it work. I've never worked a day in my life. I am so blessed to have found this career called radio because I like to sit in an air-conditioned room and talk, which you and I could do all day long. Here we have come to the end of another Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan, and we just cracked the songbook a little bit. We've got so much more to talk about. We really appreciate y'all tuning into our podcast. It's been met with great success, and we love doing it. So we'll be back very soon with another episode of
Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan.
Be sure to click the subscribe button for another episode of Hot Mic with Randy Houston and Dave Hogan.